Nobody talks about this, but some of the most criticized people in history, the ones who couldn't sit still, couldn't follow instructions, or couldn't just give a straight answer, turned out to be the ones who changed everything. And here's what's even more interesting. Science now has a name for the way their brains worked. Here's something most people never hear. The kind of thinking that built the light bulb, wrote the theory of relativity, and quietly shaped human civilization doesn't look like genius from the outside. It looks like restlessness. It looks like daydreaming. It looks like someone who can't just answer the question without asking three more. That's divergent thinking. And today, we're going to break down 10 signs that your brain might work exactly this way, and what that really means for how you experience the world. You rarely land on one answer. When most people are asked a question, they move toward a single solution. But if your mind naturally generates 5 different possible answers, and then 5 more for each of those, that's not indecision. That's divergent thinking in action. Cognitive psychologists describe divergent thinking as the brain's ability to produce multiple unique solutions from a single starting point, rather than converging on one correct answer. It's a different mode of cognition, not a flaw in processing. Unusual connections feel obvious to you. You hear a concept from one area of life, say biology, and you immediately see how it maps onto something in music, or architecture, or economics. This cross-domain pattern recognition is actually one of the most well-documented markers of creative cognition. Research by psychologist Sarnoff Mednick on what he called remote associations found that highly creative thinkers are wired to notice connections that most people simply cannot see. Not because those people are less intelligent, but because their brains filter information more narrowly. You ask questions that make people slightly uncomfortable, not because you're trying to challenge anyone, but because the questions come naturally to you. But why is that the rule? Or what if we approach this completely differently? These feel like normal curiosity to you. To people operating in convergent thinking mode, those questions can feel disruptive. The divergent mind doesn't accept premises automatically. It's wired to question the frame itself. Your best ideas arrive at the worst times, in the shower, at 2 a.m., or mid-conversation about something unrelated. This isn't random. Neuroscience research on the brain's default mode network, the system that activates during rest, mind-wandering, and unstructured thought, shows that this network is closely linked to creative insight. Your brain is literally generating novel associations when it's not actively focused. That's why stepping away from the problem often solves it. You think in images, metaphors, or stories, rather than linear logic. Where some minds naturally reach for structured arguments, divergent thinkers often reach for analogies. This isn't less rigorous, it's a different cognitive architecture. Many of the most significant scientific breakthroughs in history began with a metaphor. Einstein famously described his early thinking about relativity as a kind of visual imagination, not mathematical calculation. Many of these signs may have felt personally familiar, not as abstract psychology, but as something you've actually experienced and maybe even been criticized for. Boredom hits you faster than most people, and not just regular boredom, but a kind of mental restlessness when things become repetitive or overly predictable. This is closely tied to dopamine sensitivity. Research suggests that divergent thinkers may have a higher need for novelty stimulation to maintain engagement. The brain is essentially craving new input, new patterns, new problems to generate around. This can make routine environments genuinely difficult, not because of laziness, but because of neurology. You feel a strange sense of grief when an idea doesn't get explored. Other people can let an interesting idea go with ease. For divergent thinkers, an unexplored possibility can feel like a genuine loss, something left unfinished. This is because your brain doesn't just register ideas as information, it registers them as potential that feels real even before it becomes anything concrete. You are more comfortable with ambiguity than most. While many people find uncertainty stressful, with the prefrontal cortex working hard to resolve the unknown, divergent thinkers often feel oddly at ease with open-ended questions. Psychologists call this tolerance for ambiguity, and it's considered one of the key cognitive traits underlying creative thinking. The ability to sit with an unanswered question without rushing to close it is, in many ways, a superpower. You have experienced being misread as unfocused or scattered. This is perhaps the most psychologically important sign, not because it defines divergent thinking, but because of what it reveals about the environment most of us grew up in. Educational and professional systems are largely built around convergent thinking: one correct answer, one efficient path, one expected outcome. Divergent minds don't naturally fit that mold, and the mismatch is often interpreted as a personal failure when it's actually just a structural one. You are drawn to problems that don't have obvious solutions. Where others might find a complex, unstructured problem overwhelming, divergent thinkers often feel quietly drawn to exactly those kinds of challenges. Not because they already know the answer, but because the unstructured nature of the problem feels like space to think sideways, to explore, to generate. This is precisely why divergent thinkers have historically clustered in fields like art, science, entrepreneurship, and philosophy, fields where the question itself is as important as the answer. Here's the thing about divergent thinking that most psychology content gets wrong. It's not a personality type. It's not a fixed talent you either have or don't have. It's a cognitive style, a pattern of how your brain naturally approaches open-ended problems. And like most patterns, it comes with real strengths and real challenges. The research of J.P. Guilford, who first formally described divergent thinking in the 1950s, suggested that this mode of thinking is distinct from general intelligence, that a person could score modestly on a standard IQ test and still generate extraordinary creative output. Because divergent thinking isn't about knowing more, it's about generating more from what you know. So, if several of these signs felt personally familiar, the restlessness, the unusual connections, the discomfort with premature closure, that's worth sitting with. Not as a label to adopt, but as a lens to understand your own cognitive patterns a little more clearly. Because understanding how your brain actually works is usually the first step toward working with it rather than against it.